I don't actually know how many times I've been to Namibia. I've kind of lost count. This particular trip is the first time that I went on a holiday to the far north, right up to the border with Angola. This footage here was shot in the Marianfluss. We traveled down Van Sales Pass, the quite famous 4x4 route, into Marianfluss. And for 2 days, we never saw another vehicle moving on the road other than those in our little two-man convoy. Quite remarkable. So while I don't remember how many times I've been to Namibia, I do remember that this is the first time I went on holiday to the far north of Namibia. And there's a particular reason for that. And that reason takes me back to the very first time that I went to Namibia. In 1981, I was a photographer in the South African Air Force. And South Africa was at that point in the middle of a quite vicious war in the far north of what we call Southwest Africa and into southern Angola. So I'd arrived for work at the unit at Waterkloof Air Force Base in Pretoria, and the commanding officer had called me into his office and said, I need to prepare for a secret mission. I think he said a secret mission. Obviously, I asked him where I was going, and he said, it's a secret, I can't tell you. So I asked him for how long, needing to pack, and wanted to know for how long, and he said he couldn't tell me that either. All he would say is I could go back to my room and start preparing and packing, and tomorrow morning, he said to me, I needed to be on the runway at 6 o'clock, ready to leave. So I figured wherever I was going, I was flying. But you know, in the Air Force, we used to catch airplanes like people take buses. So the next morning, 6 o'clock, I was there waiting at the Flossie Squadron, the Hercules Squadron. And there was a flight sergeant that was there as well. So obviously that was the person I was going to be going with. And he was in a large, what we called a photo galley. It's like a caravan, and in the back of it would have been a facility to process film, make print. And there was a waiting C-160, which we attempted to drive into the back of with its cargo door at the back open. And this photo galley didn't fit. So they wheeled out a C-130, and that was a tight fit, but we managed to get this vehicle into the back of it. But so tight that once in, we couldn't open the doors of the truck that we were in. When I say a caravan, it was more like a truck and trailer. So we sat inside the vehicle with the cabin lights on inside the truck, while loadmasters climbed all over this photo galley and tied us down, and then we were plunged into darkness when the cargo door at the back closed, and we taxied down the runway and we took off. Quite noisy, quite comfortable because you're sitting in a truck, you're not squeezed into a little seat. And we flew for hours and hours and hours. I had absolutely no idea where we were, obviously. The flight sergeant, he wasn't saying much. I don't know. I don't think he actually knew where we were going either, although he may have had more information than me. Eventually, we felt a change in the tone of the engines, and that sort of weightless feeling you get when an aircraft starts to descend. A little while later, we heard the undercarriage coming down, and there was the normal landing procedure, thump onto the runway. The drone of the C-130 engines, as we taxied along, came to a stop. And then there was the grinding sound of the rear cargo door opening. Light came in. Loadmasters clambered over the vehicle and untied us. And then they banged on the back of the vehicle and shouted that we could start up and reverse out, which we did. And then looked around, and it was perfectly flat, heat haze, some little buildings in the distance, not much. And the flight sergeant looked around and he said, I think we're in Grootfontein. And so we were, Grootfontein, an advanced Air Force base in northern Namibia. And that was the very first time I went to Namibia. Otherwise we called it Southwest Africa. Having arrived in Namibia in the back of a C-130 for a secret mission, which went on for a month, by the way, the far north of Namibia always felt to me subconsciously almost like a danger zone. It was a war zone. So names like Ondangwa, Oshakati, Ruakana, the Caprivi Strip, those were places of danger. Those were places where I had friends killed and injured. So although the war there ended, God, decades ago, it just always had that feel to me that it was a place where you couldn't just go. And that first time that I'd gone there in the back of the C-130, you know, to drive then from Grootfontein to Ondangwa, there would have been engineers going out in the morning to clear landmines off the roads. So to find myself driving on those roads now with my girlfriend, stopping on the side of the road for a picnic, it was just a holiday. It just felt to me slightly surreal to be driving in a place like that with just absolutely no danger, just a holiday. I know people make a big thing about the adventure of 4x4 driving. Honestly, it's not that difficult. You're just driving, you press the accelerator, you know. There's no landmines. There's nobody trying to shoot you. It's just a place for a holiday, and an amazing place for a holiday. Jump in. As it felt to us those days as like a war zone, well, it didn't feel like a war zone. It was, in fact, a war zone. It was a security area. You couldn't just drive into it. And any of the local people we would have regarded with a degree of suspicion. They would have housed a population that we regarded as terrorists in those days, people that would try to kill us, people that would try to blow us up with landmines, try to shoot us. We were young. You know, it wasn't uncommon to have 17, 18-year-olds up there. When I was there, I was just 20. And now to be visiting these places and all the locals are friendly and helpful. They're tour guides. It really speaks about how things can change.
I'm innocent, that's my name.
Innocent?
Yes.
You don't look innocent to
I'm
me.
innocent, my brother.
You don't look innocent.
Everybody knows that in Okangwati you find a guide with the name Innocent. Okay, Mache?
Of the first white European settler who came to settle in the area. And his name was David Levin. So David Levin settled here from 1946 to 1964. Yeah, so he settled here for 20 years. The river was only covered when the rocks fell from the top. Yes, so meaning hippopotamus were living here.
On one of the days driving, it was really one of the most amazing days. We came down a pass called Divorce Pass and into this canyon near Brandberg. It was just such a lovely day. We had separated from our friends who were driving in the Jimny at this point, so it was just Lindy and I. And we dropped down into this canyon, and then the tracks got a little bit weird on us, and we got kind of lost, and we were struggling along through this river and just trying to find our way. I can't say we were in a panic about it. We were lost, but big deal. It didn't seem like anything would go wrong. And it reminded me of the flight that we took from Grootfontein to Ondangwa in a little overwing light aircraft. I think we called it a kudu in those days. I think it was about a 12-seater. Anyway, you either flow really high or really low there. Really high so no one could see you, or really low so they didn't have time to react. And our pilot got lost the days before GPS. So we were flying really high, and there's this featureless land below us, and we had this big map out, and no one knew where we were. So he said we're going to have to go down and look for a mark, something on the land that we could recognize, which made everybody nervous, because that's when you could get shot out of the sky. So they literally handed out rifles to everybody, which we then put magazines into and cocked, and down we came, treetop height. And we started zigzagging across the landscape. The flight sergeant that had been driving the photo vehicle into the back of the C-130 eventually said, "No, I recognize that road. That's the road to Ondangwa." So we settled up above the road. Bunch of idiots, really. And we followed the road all the way to Ondangwa, thinking at this height, if anybody wanted to shoot at us, they'd only have a few seconds to pick us up and sight and fire, and by that time we're out of range. You know, that's the thing when you're flying low, it's relatively fast. But there was some nervousness in the aircraft. And here we are lost in northern Namibia. Not exactly the same area, obviously. And it was just a bit of fun. As I get older, change becomes more and more of a thing. I think as we get older, we find it more difficult to adjust to change. And obviously, because we've been alive for so long, more things have changed. And when we talk about change today, we talk about our cell phones, social media, AI and LLMs, new camera technology. Yeah, and that is a thing. But if you ask me, what has been the biggest change I've experienced in my life? What has been the greatest sort of lesson that things are not immutable, that things can change? And I'd have to say it was visiting what was northern Southwest Africa, a combat zone, and going back to northern Namibia on a holiday. The similarities of the landscape was the same, and the same people were there. But the experience was something completely different. That a place can change from a combat zone to a holiday area. I mean, that's remarkable. A positive change, obviously, but that's change. And there was just very little to remind me, other than the landscape and the names, that this was a place that once upon a time was dangerous. Until then, at the end, we were leaving the Marianne Fluss, and there was a place marked on the map as a bakkie, a pickup that had been blown up in a landmine and the people killed. and it's a bit of a stopping point. So when we got to it, we stopped and we got out and we had a look. It was completely still, completely silent, not even a bit of wind. We walked around this vehicle. It had clearly been blown up. It was just full of holes. There were holes right through the engine block. You could see it had been blown up in a very, very forceful explosion. We were told that the people that were in the vehicle had been killed. So here you have a scene that's a reminder, a signpost to such extreme violence. You can just imagine the noise and the complete horror of it. And now it's just this rusted out wreck with holes. And I stopped there with Lindy and our friends, and we had a little snack and we walked around it, remembering and wondering. And then got on our cars and carried on. It was literally the only tangible sign I had that connected me to how I'd viewed that place and how I'd viewed it for decades of my life. Almost reluctant to visit it. I'd go back if I could. It's such a beautiful place.